Kent Myers.
I'm Mick Cornett, and it's time for the verdict.
As a part of its traditional and continuing commitment to public and community service, Crowe and Dunleavy Law Firm presents The Verdict, an objective discussion of contemporary legal issues hosted by Kent Myers. And also brought to you by a friend of Oklahoma Lawyers for Children and Delta Dental Plan of Oklahoma. And welcome to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett. We have put together another special program today dealing with terrorism in America. Let me introduce my co-host and one of Oklahoma's top legal experts, Kent Myers. And Kent, this is a subject that's very much on our minds these days.
Still is. We did a show on this a week ago, and we're doing another one this week because it's of such importance to us. It has such an enormous impact on us. We have seen the development in the last week of a lot of events that we want to talk about, we want to contemplate. We are fortunate to have back the two guests we had on our prior show, and we'll get to them in a little bit. But it's interesting now to see kind of how the mood of Oklahoma and the mood of the country is changing from what it was within the day or two after the events in New York and in Washington. The degree of shock is wearing off. The degree of anger is rising. I'm wondering if we are getting into more of a vengeance mode, and of course the world community is marshaling behind us in ways that we have not seen before. I'm interested that NATO has taken a pretty strong stand saying that an attack on the United States is an attack on all the NATO nations. Very, very different from the national stance back during the Gulf War, or in the war in Bosnia, for that matter.
Should probably point out that this show is being videotaped a few days before it airs, so there's a chance that some of the things that we discuss might have changed before you see the show. But I think you'll understand, and we're going to try to keep this as, in some respects, broad enough where we can all learn something about world terrorism. And we'll get to our recognized experts when we return.
I enrich our cultural landscape.
I help define our quality of life.
I am one of 4,000 artists in central Oklahoma who receive
support from Allied Arts, this community's united arts organization.
I am an Allied artist.
It's got to be around here somewhere.
Don't worry, we'll find it. Just calm down.
I swear it was right here on the desk.
All right, if I were a Will, where would I be?
It's the only copy. Without it, we're out $3 million.
I know.
Hey, accidents happen. If a condom breaks
or you have unprotected sex,
you have 72 hours to reduce
your risk of getting pregnant. It's called emergency contraception.
Got questions?
Call Planned Parenthood.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all of the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. Oklahoma Lawyers for Children has over 350 of the best attorneys and volunteers in Oklahoma County who donate their time and services to represent children. For more information, call 405-23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, and we're ready to discuss the issue of dealing with world terrorism. Kent, why don't you introduce our guests?
Well, we're awfully pleased to have back two guests that we had on the last show. On my left, let me introduce David Edger, a professor or an instructor here at the University of Oklahoma. He refuses to call himself a professor, but others do. He's a professor, according to Professor Sloan. David is a 33-year veteran of the CIA, still an officer with the CIA, and held many distinguished titles while he was with the CIA in Washington, is now the CIA officer in residence at OU. And David, thank you so much for agreeing to come back.
Thanks, glad to be here.
On my right is Professor Steve Sloan, a 35-year veteran of the University of Oklahoma as a professor in the political science department, but more importantly, one of 2 or 3 leading experts in this country on terrorism, and a widely sought lecturer and planner on how to avoid and prevent terrorism. Dr. Sloan, thank you for coming back.
It's a pleasure being here.
Let me ask you guys this. Much has been written about how well planned these attacks were. What, as experts, do you see about these attacks? And David, I'll start with you. What do you see about these attacks that leads one to believe that it was well planned?
Well, there are a number of things that I would look at. You had a simultaneity of attack at three different planes met their targets as planned. One apparently did not. You had at least, based on what we're hearing now, 18 people involved who somehow got to the right place at the right time. But even more complicated is the pre-planning that had to go on to train your own pilots and to teach people how to turn off transponders in airplanes and how to deal with the basic security measures that one doesn't even notice in a flight but that are taking place when an airplane takes off. There was obviously a great deal of planning here. I think it was a very effective operation.
Steve, what do you think about the planning aspect?
I share David's view very much, and I think we realize that there was a very heavy level of pre-attack surveillance where the individuals acquired their targets, probed very clearly for weak spots. This is not accidental. Very, very effectively, unfortunately, found those weak spots. Developed a technological capability to, in essence, use aircraft, if you will, to be a ballistic missile in a sense. And this implies, and we don't know yet, but implies the possibilities with the training, etc., that there may, to a degree, been a level of state sponsorship. We just don't know at this stage. But the fact of the matter is, this was a very sophisticated operation. There's a temptation to say it's low-tech because they use the knives, but it wasn't low-tech in terms of concept and operation because ultimately it was using highly sophisticated jet aircraft, and unfortunately it was a very impressive operation.
I think that instinctually here in Oklahoma, at least, we quickly compared this to the Oklahoma City bombing. From your gentleman's perspective, what are the similarities, what are the differences that jump out at you between the event that happened here and the event that happened in New York and Washington?
Well, speaking as an operations man, the big difference between Oklahoma City and New York was in Oklahoma City, the perpetrator wanted to get away. He used a false name when he rented the
Ryder truck.
van, the Ryder truck, and then he attempted to escape. In this case, these fellows went on the plane with their own real names, used their credit cards because they knew they weren't coming back.
I agree. I'll place another perspective on it since I was involved in terms of that tragedy, the Oklahoma City bombing. We're dealing, of course, with much larger scale now, but many of the same shocks and emotions that were generated here are, of course, being generated in a much faster position now in New York and the surrounding area. One of the things I think we'll witness on this is the type of tragic lessons we have learned in terms of post-incident stress and debriefings and psychological support that we have learned down here will be applied in New York. Just like the New Yorkers and others came down here to assist us, we're seeing the reverse happening now. And I think that will be very, very significant in the future, that all the lessons that we are learning, unfortunately, the hard way.
David, intelligence. We can start adding the people up that were likely involved in these events, and we're probably getting close to 100, or maybe more. And yet, nothing that we've seen so far gives us any indication that anyone in the intelligence community had any particular prior warning about this happening. How difficult is it to keep those kinds of events from being discovered by our intelligence sources?
Well, I would correct only one thing. I'm sure we had lots of warnings. The problem is knowing which warnings to pay attention to. There's hardly a day goes by that there's not some report of a terrorist act being planned. But very frequently these reports are so vague as to be really useless. Now, after the fact, you can look at those and say, well, now, obviously they were talking about New York, or obviously this meant that. But at the time the reports come in, they're very frequently almost unintelligible. You know somebody's planning something, but you may not know any more than that. The other problem is to get intentions, to get plans of a human being, you've got to be pretty close to that person. And the kind of terrorists that do this tend to be people who have grown up together, they've lived in the refugee camps, they've lived in the same country their whole lives. And our job then would be to get inside that group with somebody who can tell us what's going on. That's a tall order.
Why?
Well, for one thing, we don't look like them. We haven't grown up there. What's required is to actually recruit somebody who's already inside the group who can tell you what happens. It's hard to even meet these people.
And then you run the risk of them being a double agent.
Well, yeah, but that's a risk we'd be more than willing to take if we just get the chance to try to meet them and to recruit one. But, you know, it's very hard for a guy that looks like me to go into Afghanistan to a camp and meet one of these characters.
Steve, the reports have talked about cells.
Yep.
Tell our viewers what a cell is and how it operates and how they keep their secrets.
Well, these are what are called compartmentalized cells. One here, one here, one here. So if one is wrapped up, the other one still can continue its operation.
By wrapped up, you mean immobilized?
Immobilized,
Right.
arrested, and so forth.
Yeah.
Traditionally, when there was state sponsorship, you could trace the state sponsorship to a degree down to these cells. Go through the Foreign Intelligence Service, going through communication intercept. But now we see these cells being not only more compartmentalized, but yet still being able to coordinate through the internet and so forth. In a sense, they're more free-floating. And as David said, what makes life so difficult is terrorists have a plethora of targets to take here. If you're going to deal with this, you need what is called tactical intelligence, and that is on-the-ground intelligence, what's happening tomorrow, and that is exceedingly difficult to get. And as I think it was raised over here, two things. It takes a long time to develop that capability. It takes extraordinarily dedicated people to do that. And I think, as David would comment on, you're not necessarily dealing, when you have to run agents and so forth, with the nicest people. You run the risk, as in law enforcement and the police intelligence, the informants you may use, right, may not be the nicest people, will not come from Iowa and be an Eagle Scout. And I just throw that out to you because it's a real problem we face today.
Let me jump in here and get us to a break. We're discussing world terrorism with two experts, Dr. Stephen Sloan, a professor at the Political Science Department at the University of Oklahoma, and David Edger of the Central Intelligence Agency. Kent and I'll be right back after this.
Yeah, campfire's a lot of fun. You get to make some friends. You get to do some cool stuff. Campfire's for boys too, not just girls. But hey, campfire's definitely for kids. So call the campfire office nearest you to join in on the fun. 'Cause let's face it, you're not getting any younger.
St. Gregory's University has been changing the lives of people like me for 125 years. Affordable, private Catholic education, balanced with dedication to community and service, makes St. Gregory special. We're extremely proud of our students' outstanding academic achievements and our nationally ranked athletic teams. It's when you help a student build a future of balance, integrity, and service that you change a life forever. St. Gregory's, a community for life.
Yesterday was plain awful.
You can say that again. On Broadway is Oklahoma's premier youth musical theater company.
Bringing our daughter here was one of the smartest things we've ever done.
I've learned a lot. I've gained a lot of confidence. They helped me develop talents I never knew I had.
And it's fun.
On Broadway, Oklahoma's premier youth musical theater company. Now enrolling in Edmond. Call 330-CAST. That's 330-2278.
Every day, in state governments throughout the country, crucial decisions are being made that affect the lives of children and their families. But as this process takes place, children are often left voiceless. When these children raise their hands to be heard, is anyone listening? There are people listening. They are child advocates. Join us and raise your hand for kids.
We're back on The Verdict. We're discussing world terrorism. Kent?
We're at war. The president has told us we're at war. Steve, comment on with whom are we at war and with whom are we not at war?
We're not at war with people of Middle Eastern extraction, be they Americans or be they overseas. We're at war with specific people and specific states who engage in terrorism. I think it's very important to emphasize the fact that just as at the beginning of the Murrah building, we rushed to judgment and there was anti-Arab bashing, that we should not have that kind of ethnic hostility take place in this country, because if it does, we will feed basically an atmosphere of hatred and feed an atmosphere of violence, and then we'll go to war among ourselves. And so I think we should keep the focus on who the real perpetrators are and not stereotype innocent people. And I'll just put it this way. There are Christians, there are Jews, there are Muslims, there are Buddhists who all lie dead in the World Trade Center bombing and the surrounding areas. And there's a terrible equality and finality as a result of that.
David, Steve stated it very well. Let me ask you this. We knew when World War II was over because the Germans and the Japanese surrendered and the other satellite nations as well. If we're at war with terrorists, how do we know when the war is over? Or is it ever over in our lifetime?
I'm not sure we'll ever know that it's over, because Steve mentioned earlier about how terrorists operate in cells. All it really takes to make a cell is 3 or 4 guys who have got an attitude and want to do something about it. Hopefully, in the near future, we may be able to identify the people who did this particular act and take action against them and neutralize them. But that doesn't mean that somebody else isn't sitting around right now saying, well, if I had run that operation, I could have done it better. So I'm not sure we're ever going to be finished with this.
I want to change the subject a minute to a rather harsh topic, political assassinations, killing leaders of people we don't like. Steve, you've mentioned that you've actually met, I guess, Fidel Castro. And
not by myself with 640 students, but I did.
But you did. And that's somebody I think we tried to assassinate from time to time. Generally now, I think David would tell us, we have rules against such things.
Correct.
Should we have rules against such things, or should we give the power to the appropriate people in our country and in our government to carry out political assassinations?
I will not deal with the moral dimensions of this, which are profound. I will say that once you engage in political assassination, you open up the Pandora's box. If you assassinate one political leader, you can expect that the same will be used as an instrument of statescraft. And that is unfortunate. The fact of the matter is we have a peculiar view on this. It's assassination if it's a knife in the neck or a 35 in someone's head. But if we engage in a bombing and a leader is in a building, that's called collateral damage, and that's acceptable. We're entering a very difficult area if we talk about sanctioning the use of assassinations, because it works both ways, and I think that's the best I could say on it.
David, let me ask you the similar type of question. At least I have a very layman's understanding that the government of Israel engages in assassination of terrorist leaders. and they don't shy away from admitting they do it. And we support at least much of what Israel does in their internal and foreign policy. Should we have a political assassination policy?
I really don't think so. I think it is so profoundly un-American that it's an act that we as a nation, as a people, are not comfortable with. We don't go around killing our enemies in the same way that other states have. Certainly, we kill enemies in war. That's a different situation, but by political assassination, I'm thinking of the single bullet to the head of one particular individual. That's something that's reprehensible to Americans.
We've heard that both the White House and Air Force One were potential targets of these terrorists, and those aspects of the plan failed, apparently. What do you know, Steve, about what you've heard and what you've discerned about whether or not it is likely that the White House and Air Force One were indeed targets?
I really don't know at this stage, and I would not want to hazard a guess on that. Clearly, though, that will be very carefully looked at in the future. And one of the difficulties, I think this has to be placed in a little perspective, too. You may recall where a Vietnam vet crashed a small light aircraft into the west wing of the White House. I just want to raise that issue with you, where there are limits to what you can do once you're dealing with the aerospace. You have so many targets of opportunity, and even if that was not the target, or it was the target and missed, if it hit another major building in Washington, the results would have been profound also. But I do not have any information at this stage on that.
No, nor do I, just what I've seen on television.
Okay, David, let me ask you another question. You've been an intelligence gatherer for most of your adult life, and most of what you've gathered has had to be kept secret. On the other hand, the networks, the media, and in fact, to a large extent, the people want to know what's going on. Their confidence is shaken in how secure they are. How do we balance for the American people the need for secrecy about what we're doing and how we're doing it and what we're learning against the public's need to know?
That's a really tough question. And if you compare now the degree of openness of intelligence agencies and of our government with what existed just a few years ago, it's marked change. I mean, I'm at the University of Oklahoma. I teach a course on intelligence methodology to my graduate students. That was unheard of 20 years ago. But when you're talking about ongoing tactical operations, the mere revelation that you know something can be damaging. It's so tempting when people are asking you, what are we doing, to say, well, if you knew what I knew. But just saying that can do enormous damage to your ability to continue to collect. So unfortunately, the public has to have a degree of trust.
About 45 seconds, Ken.
Orrin Hatch said that he knew that Osama bin Laden was somehow involved in this, as well as some other things. He is not on the Senate Intelligence Committee, but was in the apparently on the Defense Committee. What about Senator Hatch's revelations?
Quite frankly, I was not happy about that. If indeed he had that information in a classified mode, I wish he would have kept it to himself for a variety of reasons. I think ultimately what the point that Dave raised gets into another one, and that's the crucial issue of congressional oversight, which of course our president, President Boren, has been deeply involved in. We need oversight. We need to make sure that those who are charged with these do not make policy on their own, as we've seen in the past with Nicaragua and the Contras, etc. On the other hand, there is an issue of the need for society to accept a level of secrecy when it's required to tactically meet an enemy, and it's a very difficult time.
We've got to wrap it up there. Stephen Sloan, David Edger, thank you for coming by. We'll have a few final thoughts when we return. You're watching The Verdict with Mick Cornett, Kent Myers, and our special guest.
Hello, my name is Ted Smith. I'm president of the board of directors of the Oklahoma Disability Law Center. ODLC provides free legal services in civil matters to people with physical and mental disabilities.
I'm Mike Sykes, Vice President of ODLC. For more information, call 1-800-880-7755.
The Oklahoma Disability Law Center provides high-quality legal services to people with physical and mental disabilities.
In Oklahoma, there are more than 1,600 children waiting to be adopted. They're of all ages, and for many, home has been a source of pain and conflict. They've dreamed of finding a better life and a loving family. Consider adoption. For more information, call 1-877-OK-SWIFT or visit the website www.okdhs.org. Adopt. It may be the toughest job you'll ever love.
Boy Scouts of America, where above all else, character counts.
Bringing out the best in each student. That is the simple goal and tradition of Heritage Hall. The focus on the individual shapes the educational experience at Heritage Hall. Each student benefits from small classes, able, dedicated teachers, a solid academic curriculum, and exceptional co-curricular programs of athletics, arts, community service, and other activities, parental involvement, personalized counseling, and the development of responsibility, integrity, and love of learning. If you want education taught with pride, then you want Heritage Hall.
We are wrapping up another edition of The Verdict. Today, in the light of national events, we discussed once again world terrorism.
Somber subject, great guests, information that I hope our viewers enjoyed receiving. I know I enjoyed visiting with these two great guests, and we'll look forward to another good show next week.
And our website, theverdict.tv. Thanks again to our guests, Dr. Stephen Sloan and David Edger. For Kent Myers, Mick Cornett. See you next time on The Verdict. This program was brought to you by Crow and Dunlevy, a professional corporation. And also brought to you by a friend of Oklahoma Lawyers for Children and Delta Dental Plan of Oklahoma.